She woke up inside the story of the Phantom of the Opera. But unsettlingly, it's the horror remake. Trapped in the Phantom of the Opera, Episode 1. Polly woke up with a splitting headache, discovering herself dressed in unfamiliar clothes, a shirt, vest, and stockings. The clothing was poorly made and coarse. Some seams were unraveling, stitches uneven and crooked, with a strange odor of sweat. Where was she? Who had changed her clothes? Instinctively, Polly sat up, lifting her shirt to inspect her abdomen. No wounds. She rolled up her sleeves, revealing no needle marks on her arms either. Just as she began to relax slightly, a sudden loud crash erupted outside. Bang. Immediately afterward, a chorus of ill-intentioned laughter followed. This kid's bones sure are tough. Dragged behind a horse for so long, yet not a single cry. Shoot him between the legs, see if his bones are still tough then. Another burst of cruel laughter. That won't do. Another voice intervened. If you cripple him, the manager will kill us. After all, he's the circus's moneymaker. Moneymaker? Him? That little brat? He's more talented than you think, the man sneered, turning his head and calling out mockingly, as if summoning a dog. Hey, Erik, show us your ventriloquism, your singing, those tricks of yours. Polly didn't hear what the person called Erik responded, but the laughter abruptly ceased. Everyone fell silent. Only the restless stamping of horse hooves remained audible. Someone scoffed coldly, spurred their horse, and sped away, the crowd following in silence. A chill crept into Polly's heart. If she wasn't mistaken that Erik was still being dragged behind a horse. Even more chilling was that these people were speaking English. Although she lived in Los Angeles, their accent was clearly not West Coast American. Instead, it sounded distinctly French. Had she been kidnapped by French people? Or perhaps... Polly shut her eyes tightly, head bowed. Upon clearly seeing her own hands, her mind went blank. Her scalp tightened, her heart pounding violently. These were not her hands. She had mild germophobia. Her nails had always been clean and smooth. Yet these hands were coarse and red, swollen as if frostbitten, with grime beneath the fingernails and yellowish-brown calluses in the palm. What do people look at most often in their lives? Not their faces, but their hands. Polly had never imagined waking up one day to find another person's hands attached to her body. This was something out of a horror movie. What on earth was going on? Hey, Polly, Polly, look at me. A voice exploded beside her like thunder. Polly's scalp tingled as she jerked her head upward. Somehow, a young boy had squeezed close, staring at her with large, wide eyes. Malnourished and pale, he wore a wrinkled cap, his face covered with red pimples. What are you spacing out for? The boy said urgently. Something huge happened. Did you know Erik stole Mike's gold pocket watch? Polly replied hoarsely. Erik? Yeah. Mike's furious, tied Erik's foot to the saddle and dragged him for hundreds of meters. By the time the manager found out, Erik's leg had swollen like bread, his back torn apart, leaving chunks of flesh all over the ground. Serves him right, the boy spat contemptuously. He always steals our spotlight. Chunks of flesh all over the ground. Just imagining it made Polly's back ache terribly, but the boy seemed indifferent, speaking as if describing a mouse caught in a trap rather than a human being. If you ask me, Mike went too easy on him. That pocket watch is expensive. Mike should have called the police and sent Erik straight to the gallows. Polly thought incredulously. They could call the police in this hellhole. Wait a minute. Gallows? Suddenly the boy pressed close, signaling her to lower the tent flap, leaving only a narrow slit to peek through. Shh, he whispered excitedly, his face flushed red. The manager's coming. Polly peered through the gap and immediately saw Erik. He was incredibly thin, badly wounded, lying completely still on a stretcher. His shirt was drenched black with blood, like a shadow poised to devour him entirely. The air was thick with a foul, bloody stench. At first, Polly thought her own nose was bleeding and instinctively tilted her head back. Seconds later, she realized it was the overwhelming scent of blood. A spark flashed as a man struck a match, lighting the cigar in his mouth and approaching Erik. In the dim twilight, Polly couldn't clearly see the man's face, only noting he wore a suit, with a watch chain dangling from his vest and a glittering jewel ring on his thumb. Presumably the manager the boy mentioned. Dear Mike, the man drawled leisurely. May I ask, why did you do this to him? Only then did Polly notice another boy standing nearby. Blonde, fat, sturdy, with a flushed complexion. The blonde boy immediately shouted, "He stole my watch." No, Mike. The man shook his head. "You misunderstood me. My question is, why do you think you have the right to injure him so severely?" Mike was stunned, speechless, apparently not expecting the man to defend Erik. He blurted, flustered, "Uncle, he stole the gold pocket watch my mother gave me." The man puffed his cigar, raising his hand to silence him. "You're my beloved nephew. Usually I overlook your bickering, but this time you went too far. Erik can perform magic, ventriloquism, singing." The man glanced at Erik on the stretcher with pity, as if regarding a dog too weak to guard a door. "If I command, he could even jump through a hoop of fire, but you're just wasting my food. You don't even earn half of Erik's wages." Mike's face turned red, then purple. But he stole my gold watch, Uncle. He stole my watch, it's gold." The man calmly asked, "Did you see him stealing it?" Mike stammered, "No, but did you find evidence of his theft?" "No, but who else?" The man's voice abruptly turned cold. "If he wasn't caught, good for him." Mike stared incredulously. "Uncle, how could you? How could I?" The man sneered. "My sister was a master pickpocket, able to empty a lady's bedroom unnoticed. Yet you lost your watch without even noticing, nearly crippling my golden goose." The man glanced down coldly at Erik. "Now, Erik's leg is broken, his back injured. Who'll perform magic in the meantime?" "You." Mike, as though repeatedly slapped, turned red with embarrassment, unable to respond. Being family, the man scolded a bit longer before dismissing Mike with a wave. Polly reviewed their conversation, a chill climbing up her spine. Was there even law in this place? Mike appeared only 16 or 17, yet the man casually revealed that Mike's mother was a pickpocket. He lightly reprimanded Mike's brutal actions, which nearly killed another child. Adding together these eerie details, the pocket watch, gallows, cigars, matches, unfamiliar hands, Polly realized with dread she might no longer be in modern times. Taking a deep breath, Polly forced herself to remain calm, listening for more useful information. The man finished his cigar, lightly kicking the stretcher. "Can you still speak, Erik?" No response. Undeterred, he continued, "I know you both expect me to dispense justice, but I'm neither judge nor policeman. I don't care who stole what. I only want money. Mike's mother gave me 5,000 francs to look after him." The man chuckled. "If you can earn me 5,000 francs, I won't even care if you kill Mike. Understood?" Still no response. Erik remained silent and motionless, as if already dead. Yet Polly felt chilled to the bone, heart sinking. He clearly implied that once Erik earned enough money, he could murder Mike. The manager was encouraging the two boys to kill each other. Where exactly was this? Or rather, which era? Polly struggled to breathe, cold sweat soaking her body. Then, a hoarse, faint voice rang out. "Understood. Good boy," the manager praised. "Don't worry. Madam Smith has copied several remedies from the gypsies. You won't get gangrene." Gypsies? Gangrene? Polly's head spun slightly. If earlier it was mere suspicion, she now knew with certainty she wasn't in the modern world. She'd actually transmigrated. The manager considered for a moment, then set down a bottle in front of Erik. "Whiskey. Drink up. You'll feel better." Polly stared blankly. If her eyes hadn't deceived her, half of Erik's body was soaked with blood. Could someone in his condition really drink whiskey? Yet, Erik suddenly seized the bottle, startling even the manager. Fingers trembling with urgency, he bit off the stopper and eagerly gulped it down. The boy next to Polly muttered jealously, "That's Scotch whiskey. He steals, yet the manager rewards him?" Polly said nothing. She turned away, silently observing the shabby wagons, filthy blankets, dim gaslights, and murky buckets nearby. She had truly transmigrated. Even worse, she'd landed in an entirely foreign country. Suddenly finding breathing difficult, Polly soon realized the cause wasn't fear, but her tightly bound chest. Quietly, she reached inside her shirt, discovering a chest binder, and tucked inside a gold pocket watch. Erik hadn't lied. He hadn't stolen Mike's watch. She had... "Polly?" The little boy called again, now sounding a bit impatient. "You're spacing out again." "Sorry." Polly came back to herself and discreetly slipped the gold pocket watch back inside the chest binder. "I'm just really tired." The boy shrugged indifferently. "You're never awake. So, is Erik still stalking you?" This was critical information. Polly cautiously responded. "What do you think?" "What do I think?" The boy pulled a piece of tobacco from his pocket, stuffing it into his mouth and chewing. I think it's impossible. You're just imagining things. He turned to spit. Honey, if Erik were capable of stalking you, sneaking into your tent at night and standing behind you to scare you, you think Mike could have dragged him behind a horse like that? Anyway, I'm off. The boy waved his hand dismissively. With all the commotion today, we'll probably get beaten up tomorrow, all thanks to Erik. May his wounds fester with maggots? After the boy left, Polly lowered the tent flap and prepared to examine the watch more closely. But just then, she noticed writing covering the canvas walls of her tent. Large, black letters crammed together like swarming flies. At a glance, it was disturbingly eerie. Once she understood what was written, Polly felt a chill crawl up her scalp, a wave of fear rushing to her head. He will follow you. He will watch you. He will kill 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 you. A few letters were obscured by stains. Polly held her breath and leaned closer to read clearly. He's watching you from behind. Her hair stood on end, and she whipped around. Nothing. What the hell? Who wrote this? And who exactly was he? The little boy's words echoed in her mind, causing her heart to leap violently. Could it be Erik? But how? Polly quickly analyzed her surroundings. She seemed to be in a circus. Here, the manager played judge and executioner. Mike was the manager's nephew, valued at 5,000 francs, allowed to bully Erik as long as he didn't permanently cripple him. Erik was the star attraction, magician, ventriloquist, singer. So here was the problem. If Erik were as terrifying as the writing suggested, why would Mike and the manager dare treat him so cruelly? Polly's mind churned. She began searching her tent, which was small, half wagon, half canvas, mildew dotting the walls. A filthy blanket covered the ground, its original color indiscernible. The sleeping bag smelled damp and sour, nearly making her gag. After searching thoroughly, she found nothing useful. For instance, who was this body's original owner? Why was she disguised as a boy? And why did she steal Mike's watch? What was her relationship to Erik? She took a deep breath, focusing her eyes on the sleeping bag. There was an opening meant for sleeping, embroidered with a name on its edge. Polly Clement. Good. At least she knew her name now. It was a start. Closing her eyes briefly, she slipped her hand inside the sleeping bag, discovering a notebook. She pulled it out, a small book sewn crudely with hemp thread, pages coarse and yellowed, fibers visible in the paper. Polly flipped open the first page. September 3rd, 1888, my diary disappeared. Mike probably threw it away, who knows. They hate literate people. They also hate Erik, but never dare cross him. I don't want to be beaten anymore. Why don't they beat Erik instead? September 8th, 1888, Madame Momo hit me repeatedly, claiming my hands weren't quick enough. She told me to observe Erik. He stole a wallet without even touching the victim. How? Witchcraft? Is that why he wears a mask? Only he wears one here. September 9th, 1888, beaten again. Why always me? September 10th, 1888, beaten, always beaten. I can't take it anymore. Why me? Madame Momo praised Erik again. Mike hates him, but rarely bullies him. I hate Erik. I truly hate him. September 20th, 1888. Mike's watch vanished. Only Erik could steal it unnoticed. We all wanted Erik to give it back. He stayed silent. At dinner, I thought he glanced at me. Why look at me? He's the best thief here. October 5th, 1888. Why does he keep watching me? October 8th, 1888. Why? I buried it. Yet it reappeared on my bed. Why? I'm going mad. He's still watching. Always watching. His eyes glow. He's a monster. October 9th, 1888. He wants to kill me. He'll definitely kill me. Those eyes kill. What can I do? Resist? Mike? The manager? Madame Momo? No. None of them. October 11th, 1888. How long did he stand behind me? A minute? 2? Half an hour? Or forever? He's insane. October 12th, 1888. I threw it into the swamp, crocodiles everywhere. Why is it back again? What does he want from me? What? The diary ended here. The handwriting had become increasingly chaotic, heavy, ink bleeding through pages. Polly shuddered as she read. Clearly, the original owner's literacy level was limited. Her descriptions were simple, direct. Yet precisely this simplicity sent chills down Polly's spine, as if someone really stood behind her. Should she believe it? Polly reread the entries. The original owner and Erik occupied the circus's lowest rung. But Erik was talented, stealing effortlessly, skilled in many tricks, while she sank to the very bottom, despised by Madame Momo and Mike. Over time, resentment built, prompting her to steal Mike's watch and frame Erik. She cautiously buried it, yet later it reappeared. Her mental state deteriorated, believing Erik was stalking her, intending murder. Terrified, she threw the watch into the swamp, but it returned the next day. The diary then ceased. Either she'd gone completely insane or Polly herself had taken her place. Anyone reading this diary would consider Erik a patient predator, calmly toying with his prey like a cat tormenting a mouse. But if Erik was capable of driving someone insane, why did he end up tortured by Mike? If he lacked that power, how to explain the diary and tent graffiti? What did the original owner gain by portraying Erik so horrifyingly? And why did the watch return? Or perhaps the diary referred to something else entirely? Polly couldn't reach a conclusion. At least she now knew her time period, 1888, the late 19th century, amidst the Second Industrial Revolution. Paper production was common, thus explaining the diary. Polly set down the diary, uncertain. What now? The original owner had stolen Mike's watch, framed Erik, who'd been brutally tortured. Crucially, the watch was still with her. She was stuck. Joining Mike would make the watch a ticking bomb. But if she allied with Erik? Polly lowered her eyelashes. Every word of the diary warned her not to trust Erik. He might kill her anytime. But objectively, she saw Erik as more valuable than Mike or anyone else here, an ally worth gaining. The real question was, how? Just then, a commotion interrupted her thoughts. Polly quickly hid the diary, peering outside. A group of drunken men approached, alcohol, sweat, and tobacco stench filling the air. Did it really fall from the sky? Magic, you reckon? Magic would never let you touch it. I mean, city magic. Fifth Avenue has a man who bottled lightning. At night, it shines brilliantly. Bottled lightning? That's just gaslights. Idiot. I mean electric lights. Far superior. Electric lights indeed appeared around 1888. Polly sighed with relief. If it were the Middle Ages, facing arsenic makeup or leech facials, she'd rather die. Then, seeing clearly, her eyes widened. Wait, wasn't that her hiking backpack? She transmigrated into this disguised girl, and the backpack came along? Did this mean she might return home? In the dark, the men studied the backpack, stabbing futilely at its cut-resistant fabric. Eventually, frustrated, they tossed it aside, falling asleep, clutching their guns and bottles. Polly's breathing quickened. Her chance had come. The backpack contained everything: medical supplies, snacks, canned food, tissues, spare phone, power bank. Above all, the medical kit, bandages, antibiotics, painkillers, iodine swabs, would help save Erik. She must retrieve it. Polly waited cautiously for another 10 minutes, until the entire group finally drifted off to sleep. They appeared to be the circus guards, black, matted beards, grimy fingernails, battered hats on their heads, knives and keys hanging at their waists. What froze her in place was the vintage rifle standing upright beside them. She could even see the greasy sheen on the barrel, evidence of recent maintenance. The realism of these details sent chills down her spine. Stay calm, Polly urged herself. Don't focus on the unsettling details, just move forward. The backpack was within reach, but it was all too real. The wooden table was littered with half-eaten food, emitting a nauseating, rotten meat stench. Newspapers soaked with oily stains lay on the ground, along with 3 large greased animal traps, bigger and heavier than she'd imagined, each requiring meticulous oiling, just like guns. She wouldn't have known these details if she hadn't truly transmigrated. That realization made her shudder anew. Polly took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay focused and not look back. She had an irrational fear that if she did, she'd find the guards awake and staring directly at her. Darkness and uncertainty always sparked imagination. Struggling against her racing thoughts, Polly finally reached the backpack. She pressed the hidden latch. Click. The bag opened softly. She couldn't resist glancing back. The men remained asleep. Despite their unconsciousness, Polly still felt the intense sensation of being watched, as if someone else were hiding in the darkness, observing her with cold, intrusive eyes. Her skin prickled uncomfortably, but there was no turning back now. Gritting her teeth, she opened the backpack just enough to find the medical kit. She took nothing else, aware it would only increase risk. Clenching the medical kit between her teeth, Polly quickly closed the backpack and returned it to its original position, then hurried toward Erik's tent. 1 step, 2 steps. The distance shrank rapidly. Almost there, yet the chilling feeling of being watched didn't fade. It grew closer, trailing her slowly but deliberately, steps uneven yet calm. Her heart raced, cold sweat slicking her palms, making her nearly drop the medical kit. Just as she bent to enter the tent, a hand shot out, grabbing her wrist and slamming her violently to the ground. With a heavy thud, Polly's back hit hard. Fighting the pain, she looked up sharply into a stark white mask with 2 hollow eye holes staring down, cold and indifferent. Only he wears a mask here. It was Erik who'd been following her. Polly gasped sharply, struggling to rise, but Erik held her wrists down effortlessly. Silently, he stared, his thumb pressed firmly against her carotid artery, tightening suddenly, then easing slightly, as if deliberating whether to strangle her. No time to wonder how someone so gravely injured could overpower her single-handedly. Polly urgently blurted out, "I'm here to help you!" No response. The silence stretched unbearably. He continued staring, utterly unmoving. Polly tried to discern something from his eyes, but the white mask was disturbingly impassive, making his gaze seem eerily inhuman. She swallowed hard, forcing sincerity into her voice. "I really want to help you. I didn't think Mike and the others would go that far." She'd expected some reaction. Instead, Erik tilted his head slightly and pulled out a knife, a sharp, gleaming blade. Polly's mind went blank. For several seconds, icy dread numbed her scalp, blood roaring in her ears, throat locked in terror. She'd once worked as an actress in Los Angeles. Comedies, horror movies, musicals. She'd even played a corpse in detective dramas, happily earning a paycheck for lying still. Scenes like this weren't unfamiliar to her. But, on set, knives were fake. Corpses in morgues never fought back. Now, she lay frozen, clueless about what to do. As the knife crept closer, every hair on her arm stood on end, her back drenched with cold sweat, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Would he kill her? If so, how? Stab her throat directly? The blade came closer still. Her entire body froze, cheeks numb. Suddenly, Erik's thumb moved upward, pressing into her jaw and forcibly opening her mouth. He really planned to stab her throat. Too terrified to scream, Polly could only watch helplessly as Erik held her jaw open, using the knife ... to tap her teeth? He didn't intend to kill her. Then, what was he doing? Erik tapped her teeth again, his gaze still cold and unreadable, yet Polly understood clearly. He wanted her to keep talking. Polly collapsed, suddenly boneless, gasping with relief. Her voice cracked, emotions raw and genuine. "I'm so sorry for what happened before. You're so talented, I could never compare. Madame Momo always praised you while hitting me, and I just wanted to avoid being beaten. I'm sorry. I never knew Mike would hurt you like that. I really am sorry." Perhaps driven by her survival instinct, she'd never delivered lines so convincingly before. She nearly convinced herself, "I'm really here to help. These medicines are from my hometown. If you don't trust me, I'll try them first." Still, no reply. Erik remained utterly silent. After a long moment, he sheathed the knife and pulled Polly to her feet. Only now could she glance around the tent. Erik's bed was better than hers, a real bed instead of a sleeping bag. But there was no pillow, just 2 thin blankets. An iron bucket filled with murky blood stood nearby, indicating he'd already attempted basic wound care. He seemed fond of crafting masks. A wooden rack stood in the corner, covered with various chilling masks, all labeled meticulously with red ink dates. One white mask bore finely drawn features, making it somehow even more unsettling. Just as Polly turned to examine another mask, 2 loud knocks startled her. Erik tapped the bed frame sharply with his knife handle, silently demanding attention. She nearly asked, "Can't you speak?" But then remembered he'd talked to the manager, and everyone knew he sang and practiced ventriloquism. Clearly, he just didn't want to speak to her. Seeing she was watching, Erik tucked the knife back into his boot and removed his shirt, revealing his mutilated back. He was terribly thin, but far more frightening was his injury. Skin stripped raw, exposed flesh red and wet, embedded with dirt and leaves. How was he even alive, let alone capable of overpowering her? Polly shook her head slightly. She'd already transmigrated. Why question impossibilities? Taking a breath, she retrieved ibuprofen from the medical kit, handing him a capsule and swallowing one herself. It relieves pain. After studying her briefly, Erik swallowed the pill dry, without hesitation. Polly nearly offered electrolyte water, but reconsidered when Erik swallowed effortlessly. She disinfected a scrape on her own arm first, then asked cautiously, "May I?" He nodded slowly. Using tweezers, scissors, and clotting powder, Polly cleaned his wounds. Fortunately, she'd watched numerous first aid videos while packing. Otherwise, she'd be utterly lost. Certain areas had already coagulated into lumps of dead tissue requiring removal before bandaging. Shockingly, Erik remained utterly silent throughout, corpse-like in his quiet endurance. Polly couldn't resist asking softly, "Doesn't it hurt?" Again, no response. She pressed her lips together, continuing quietly. Whether ibuprofen helped Erik was uncertain, but it certainly helped her. The pain in her back had vanished entirely. She regretted not buying injectable Chitosan, rumored to stop bleeding in 3 seconds. Some of Erik's wounds were frighteningly severe, yet, astonishingly, the clotting powder stopped bleeding immediately. His recovery speed was terrifying. His leg was clearly broken, yet he seemed barely inconvenienced. Was he even human? Erik, unfazed, examined the clotting powder's packaging with clear curiosity. Polly regretted her imported choice. Everything was labeled in English, entirely readable to him. What if he turned it over to the manager and accused her of witchcraft? "Don't worry," she stammered nervously. "It stops bleeding, nothing harmful. The scabs fall off naturally." Silently, Erik handed it back. Polly relaxed slightly, noticing electrolyte water and energy bars left in the kit. She decided to keep the bars for emergencies. At the circus's lowest rung, consistent meals were unlikely. But electrolyte water might help Erik recover blood loss. Strategically, she thought, even if they couldn't become friends, he could distract Mike. If Erik died, Mike would surely torment someone else. And if he discovered her theft, she'd be doomed. "If you're thirsty," Polly offered gently, "this helps replenish your body." But Erik ignored it. Polly glanced around, noticing 2 dull cans near Erik's bed. Her bright electrolyte water now suspiciously resembled poisonous mushrooms. "It's safe," Polly said, drinking a mouthful herself to prove it. She crouched, sincerity radiating from her every feature. "From now on, please try trusting me. I'll find a way to prove you didn't steal Mike's watch." Her voice faded under Erik's blank, indifferent stare. Regretting her words and promises, Polly backed toward the exit. In an instant, Erik lunged, driving his knife into the wall beside her face, mere centimeters away. Polly thanked her acting experience for steady nerves and bladder control. As before, Erik said nothing, yet she clearly understood. He didn't trust her, and he wanted her to shut up and leave. After returning to her tent, Polly couldn't sleep for a long time. Erik was definitely not normal. Ordinary people didn't possess such terrifying resilience. Even more disturbing was the fact that he clearly could speak, yet chose silence, like a madman shrouded in mystery. Polly couldn't help but wonder if she'd done something wrong before transmigrating to deserve this. But she hadn't done anything special, just thrown her hiking backpack in the trunk, stretched out in the back seat, and randomly clicked on a movie while waiting for her friends. The film was old, pacing slow. She fell asleep halfway through, waking just as it reached the midpoint. The male protagonist stood behind an elegantly dressed lady, dressed himself in a black coat and top hat, face hidden beneath the brim. He slowly pulled on black leather gloves. Just when Polly assumed it was a 19th century romance film, the man suddenly wrapped a rope around the woman's neck, strangling her without hesitation. By the time people discovered her, she had been tossed into the banquet hall's boiler, her head boiled soft lace skirt floating like greasy fat atop the soup. Polly froze, her finger hovering over the food delivery app. Only then did she notice the movie's title, The Phantom of the Opera. Confused, she searched online, realizing it was a horror adaptation from the 1970s, infamous for graphic scenes and bloody splatters. In the original novel, the Phantom loved a ballerina at the Paris Opera House, teaching her to sing while threatening the manager to let her replace the lead soprano. When the diva refused, the Phantom embarrassed her by causing her to croak like a frog on stage. In this film, however, the Phantom strangled the soprano outright, tossing her corpse into the boiler. In the original story, the Phantom kidnapped the female lead, confining her in his underground labyrinth. But after receiving a kiss from her, he relented and allowed her to leave with another man. In this adaptation, the Phantom became an inhuman monster. Revealing his true face involved peeling his own skin off. And instead of redemption, he was always ready to drag the female lead into death. In the end, rather than kissing him, the heroine burned him alive in the labyrinth. Like most Western horror films, it wasn't genuinely terrifying. After a few minutes, Polly returned to ordering food. Objectively speaking, the film was average, typical of Western horror, lacking psychological tension, relying instead on excessive gore and explicit scenes. But all of that assumed she lived in a normal world. Being trapped in a horror version of the Phantom of the Opera was infinitely more terrifying than any East Asian horror film she'd ever watched. In East Asian horror, avoiding taboos related to spirits usually kept you safe. But in Western horror films, nearly anything could trigger a brutal death. Having a quiet sibling, a cheating parent, camping outdoors, a picnic in the park, attending parties, or even sharing a kiss with your boyfriend could all justify murder. The more Polly thought about it, the more her skin crawled. She vowed never to underestimate Western horror again. How peacefully had she lived before to think that being stalked by psychopaths wasn't terrifying? It took a long time to calm her racing heart. Just because Erik wore a mask, sang, practiced ventriloquism, and performed magic didn't necessarily mean he was the opera ghost, especially the horror film version. Maybe she'd transmigrated into the original novel? Though that wasn't much better. The original Phantom threatened to blow up the Paris Opera if the heroine didn't choose him. Even the musical's Phantom, seemingly less extreme, kidnapped and hypnotized Christine, nearly hanging her fiancé. The only difference was he hadn't intended to destroy the opera house, but if pushed far enough, who knew? Polly comforted herself that her name was Polly Clement, and this wasn't the Paris Opera House but a circus. It had nothing to do with the Phantom of the Opera. Even if Erik really was the Phantom, surely he wouldn't blow up Paris for her. Relieved by this thought, she finally closed her eyes. The next morning, Polly awoke at dawn. Her body seemed to have a reliable, biological clock. She sleepily glanced at the gold watch, 5:30 a.m. Just as she lay back down, realization hit. She quickly shoved the watch back into her chest binder. The medical kit was still exposed. Unable to find a suitable hiding place, she hastily buried it in a pile of dirty clothes. Clearly not a long-term solution. She needed somewhere safer and cleaner to hide it. Outside, the circus slowly stirred. Chicken clucks, bird songs, footsteps, chopping wood, coughing, loud spitting, and water pouring into boilers filled the air. Polly took a deep breath, dressed, and stepped outside. Dense golden mist blanketed everything. Tobacco, stale sweat, and greasy leftovers saturated the air, the ground dotted with drying spit. In moments, she felt filthy. She resolved inwardly that whether she returned home or not, she'd escape this place to somewhere clean. Suddenly, cheers erupted ahead. No wonder the circus seemed deserted. Everyone was gathered, applauding. The manager stood among them, jovially embracing a tall, thin man. Behind them sat a plain-looking woman, face waxen, wearing a blue satin dress with a lace bow. Her skirt oddly lifted, revealing 4 legs. Each leg wore striped stockings and red shoes, disturbingly uncanny. Ignoring her ghostly pallor, the manager patted her wheelchair warmly. Thank God Emily found her long-lost brother. Remember what I've always said? We're here because our families abandoned us. Mike's mother, my sister, paid me 5,000 francs to take him, clearly abandoning him. Emily was found at the train station. Polly's mother, a lunatic, nearly stabbed his eye with a pen. He smiled faintly. Even Erik, a genius beyond measure, was unwanted by his own parents. But I've always promised, if any of you find your family, or anyone willing to take you, I won't hold you back. Right, Emily? Emily remained silent, her face as lifeless as wax. Ignoring her silence, the manager cheerfully announced a party to celebrate Emily finding family, promising music and dancing. Everyone cheered loudly, stomping their feet. Just as Polly planned to quietly observe them, yesterday's voice squeezed forward, interrupting her thoughts. Polly, the manager told us to move stuff from the storage. Reluctantly, she followed him. Along the way, the boy whispered conspiratorially, "Do you really believe it? That guy definitely isn't Emily's brother. She probably hired him." Remembering Emily's pale face, Polly asked, "Why would she do that?" "You're so naive." He scoffed. "She's a freak. She earns money just by existing." There's a freak in London who even met a princess. Polly nodded absently, but felt things weren't so simple. The manager, obsessed with profits, would never easily release a valuable asset like Emily, simply because she'd found family. Especially since yesterday he'd encouraged 2 children to fight to the death. She suddenly remembered Erik was only 16 or 17. She'd been terrified by a severely wounded teenager. But recalling his chilling approach, the cold gaze behind his white mask, and the knife hovering above her face, she shivered uncontrollably. He was an untamed beast. If possible, she hoped never to interact with him again. Their storage was just another wagon, foul-smelling and moldy. Cobwebs stretched between boxes. Shelves coated thickly with dust displayed jars of pickled animal livers. Moving crates was strenuous. Neither spoke, silence punctuated by creaking boards. With one box left, the boy vanished, claiming he needed the bathroom. When he didn't return by noon, Polly reluctantly unpacked it herself. Inside were grotesque curiosities, mermaid skeletons, giant hands, cursed paintings, possessed dolls, even a fetus specimen. It was small, gelatinous, barely formed features seeming ready to open its eyes. Polly hastily closed the lid but froze, noticing the label, "Child born unexpectedly to 4-legged Emily." Thanks to her permission, we preserved it, showing God's marvelous creation, even the deformed bear life. Polly's blood ran cold. Given the boy's comments on Freak's popularity, she couldn't avoid dark thoughts. Emily must have been pregnant, wanting to escape, but the manager forced a miscarriage, displaying her child for profit. This explained Emily's ghostly pallor and silence. Would the ruthless manager truly let anyone leave? Despite its seal, Polly imagined the specimen's liquid seeping through her fingers, crawling beneath her skin, a sensation of pure terror. "Calm down," she told herself, forcing down panic. Treat it as a survival horror game. Escape condition, leave the circus. Known characters, manager, Mike, Emily, the boy, Erik. The manager, cruel, profit-driven Mike, his nephew, the boy, childish beneath his facade, Emily. Tragic, immobile, victimized. Ultimately, only Erik could help her. The circus was horrifyingly twisted. Alone, escape was impossible. She needed Erik, dangerous, unstable Erik, even if it meant risking death at his hands. After finishing the chores, the little boy finally reappeared, grinning as he apologized. Polly had other things on her mind and didn't bother to scold him. Lunch consisted of stew and potatoes, and it was utterly disgusting. The stew was barely salted and emitted a greasy, fishy stench. The only edible part was the potatoes, but even those hadn't been peeled properly. Polly nearly cried while eating. Still, the meal wasn't a total loss. At least she learned the boy's name was John. Now, if he slacked off again, she could shout his name with authority. Just like in the morning, Erik was nowhere to be seen. Polly began to worry. What if something had happened to him? What if his strength yesterday was just a last burst before death? How was she supposed to escape then? After lunch, the men went off to smoke and boast, while the women cleaned dishes and mended clothes. A few people gathered around her hiking backpack, fiddling with it and discussing how to open it. Even the manager came by for a look, but he didn't seem all that interested. After a few words, he wandered off. The afternoon sun scattered the thick fog, and the landscape grew clearer. Polly realized they had camped near a swamp. The air was humid like a soaked towel. Not far away flowed a deep green river, murky and unsettling, swarmed with buzzing mosquitoes. She could swim, but diving into that kind of river would be suicide. Besides, the original owner's diary had mentioned crocodiles nearby. The camp had 2 exits, each guarded by men with rifles. One of the exits even had a stable. Polly had never been near a horse before, and didn't realize how easily startled they were. Just a strange smell could make them rear up and whinny. So her options were, either become a horse whisperer overnight, or escape through the exit without the stable. Too hard. She had thought, like the heroine of a transmigration novel, she could share modern music playlists to win favor with the manager and raise her status in the circus. But that plan assumed the manager didn't turn fetuses into specimens, and that there was no local tradition of burning witches. In the 19th century, abortion was illegal, yet the manager had risked lifetime imprisonment just to put an unborn baby on display. Polly couldn't help but suspect he'd committed far worse crimes. Like murder? Even if negotiations went smoothly, all it would do was tie her tighter to the circus. She didn't even know the original body's exact age, probably no older than 16. Would a manager like that respect a 16-year-old and give her fair treatment or a cut of the profits? Obviously not. After weighing her options, Polly once again turned her gaze toward Erik's tent. Aside from him, she really had no one else to rely on. Should she take the risk? But soon, another problem arose. Even as the evening party began, Erik still didn't show. His tent remained dark, no light at all. Polly grew anxious but dared not show it. Compared to lunch, the party food was luxurious: beer, fruit wine, meat pies, smoked ham, roasted potatoes, blood sausages, and meat pudding. She was curious about the pudding until the stench of suet and kidney hit her. She recoiled. The others, however, ate heartily. Now wasn't the time to be picky. Polly forced herself to grab a pie and some roasted potatoes, holding her breath as she gulped them down with fruit wine. The wine helped clear her mind a bit. She'd been too cautious, afraid to speak, afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Even knowing Emily's brother was suspicious, she hadn't dared ask questions. She appeared calm on the surface, but inwardly she was terrified of slipping up, of being interrogated and exposed. This couldn't continue. She needed to act, do something the original Polly Clement would never have done, to see if she could change her fate. Suddenly, a round of applause broke out. The manager pushed Emily's wheelchair into the crowd, beaming. "Emily's about to leave," he announced, "and she wants to sing one last song for everyone. Any volunteers to sing with her?" Many raised their hands as the band played a cheerful melody. People gathered around the fire, singing and dancing. Polly didn't recognize the tune. It must have been a local folk song. While everyone watched Emily, Polly turned and started heading toward Erik's tent. But as soon as she looked back, she saw him, that thin figure standing in the dark. His white mask glared starkly in the shadows. The two hollow eye holes were expressionless and doll-like, radiating a cold detachment. He silently watched the crowd, lost in thought. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and met her eyes. It was like a bucket of ice water poured over her head. Polly's scalp tightened, her whole body chilled. She instinctively wanted to step back, but she clenched her cup tightly and resisted the urge to flee. She had to act, do something the original Polly never would. So, what if he was the phantom? He didn't know she wasn't the real Polly Clement, but she knew his story, his wounds, how no one appreciated his talent, how no one dared come near him. Even his own mother didn't love him. That's why he acted like a wild, uncivilized beast. She remembered how the original heroine had tamed him. With a kiss, just one kiss, and he gave up everything. Even if he was the horror version of the Phantom and wouldn't give in so easily, she had to try. Do something the original wouldn't dare. Polly looked at him and took a step forward. He looked back and tilted his head slightly, not as a question, but like a predator narrowing its focus on its prey. Thinking about the knife that might come at her throat at any moment, Polly's legs weakened. Her stomach felt like it was filled with cold stones. But she forced herself forward. One step, then another. As she approached, the air grew heavy and thick, hard to breathe. Erik stared intently, his gaze growing more guarded. It felt like his eyes were gripping her, rooting her in place. Under his scrutiny, she froze, barely able to speak. Her voice trembled. "Are you feeling better?" He said nothing, his eyes still cold and suspicious. Polly wished he were a real animal. Then maybe she could extend a hand and let him sniff her. Instead, she stood there like a fool, being studied. The band grew louder. People had started waltzing. There were more men than women, so some had to dance with bearded guards. Everyone was laughing like they lived in a different world. Polly mentally prepared herself again and finally spoke. "Guess what I saw today in the storage?" No response. Emily's baby, preserved in a jar. Still no response. Erik's expression didn't change, like he didn't care at all. He wasn't interested in Emily's baby. Polly knew that. She only said it to lead into, the manager would commit a felony for a little profit. "Do you really believe he'll let Emily go? Let any of us go?" Still, Erik showed no emotion. Polly didn't give up. She bit her lip and raised the stakes. "If I'm right, that man claiming to be her brother is a freak hunter, a middleman who sells people like us." The word freak finally sparked something. His gaze dropped lower, scraping across her face like rough stone. Polly's scalp prickled under his stare. Her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to remain calm. The manager preserved Emily's fetus. Maybe now he wants to preserve her too. Have you considered what happens if he realizes her fetus is worth more than she is? Polly inhaled deeply, meeting Erik's eyes. You and I could end up just like that. Specimens in jars, displayed in a gallery. For a moment, his gaze grew sharp, as if he might tear off her skin. She was close to breaking through. It was a dangerous move, but she still had cards left. Her breathing quickened, blood rushing to her face, ears ringing. She couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement, a thrill before the gamble. Imagine your mask being torn off. Before she could finish, a shadow fell over her. Erik leaned forward, his eyes no longer vacant but burning with fury. From behind the mask, his breathing grew loud and ragged, like a snake hissing in defense. He grabbed her throat, silencing her. Polly's heart pounded violently. Panic surged. Her vision darkened, sweat soaking her back. But she had to press on. Imagine your mask being torn off, your head in a jar, everyone staring at your face. His grip tightened abruptly. Polly could almost hear the creak of bones in her neck. His breathing turned ferocious, like a storm battering the white mask. I know you don't want that, she gasped, struggling to breathe. I don't either. You're the most talented person I've ever met. I've never envied anyone before. But I envy you. I don't want to see you turned into a specimen. I want people to hear your brilliance. But Erik didn't let go. He stared at her, cold and merciless, completely unmoved. She knew if she pushed any further, he might actually snap her neck. Luckily, she had 2 more cards. I'm just like you. She wheezed, dizzy but determined. My mom hated that I wasn't a boy. She nearly stabbed my eye with a pen. She made it up, based on what the manager had said. Polly's mother was a lunatic, tried to stab him with a pen. She wouldn't let me wear dresses, wouldn't let me live like a girl, shave my head like a dog. Sometimes I wonder if I were you, a brilliant boy, would she have loved me more? The grip vanished. She'd won. Air rushed into her lungs, and Polly coughed violently, like a drowning victim gasping on shore. But that wasn't enough. She needed him to stand with her, not just spare her life. Work with me. Let's leave this place. Start a new circus together, she said, wiping sweat and tears from her face. You have everything. Why stay here and suffer? Still no reply. He stood frozen, as if returning to his detached, unfeeling self. Good thing she had one last card. Polly stepped forward, stood on her toes, and kissed his mask. His eyes filled with confusion, panic, and refusal. Yet he didn't attack. For several seconds, he was completely disarmed, like a whipped dog, dazed and bewildered. And that was when Polly realized he was just a boy, a living, breathing person, not a shadow, not a threat, not a knife waiting to strike. She opened her mouth to speak, but when she looked up, he was gone. Erik vanished so quickly it was as if he disappeared into thin air. Recalling the look in his eyes just before he left, Polly felt confident that she had convinced him to cooperate. The heavy weight in her chest finally lifted, and even the smell of the meat pudding no longer made her want to gag. The so-called meat pudding was more like a mushy steamed bun. Cutting it open revealed cooked rabbit meat and lamb kidneys, all coated in a thick suet-based gravy that reeked of grease. Maybe, with vinegar, soy sauce, and chili peppers, it could taste better. Unfortunately, the only thing on the table was a shared slab of butter, already gouged by who knew how many people. As the party wound down, one man leaned toward Emily, attempting to lift her skirt to see whether she really had 2. They kept the word in their mouths, rolling it around with their tongues, grinning lewdly. Emily sat motionless in her wheelchair, her waxen face pale as ever, saying nothing. The manager drank quietly. Only when things got too rowdy did he scold the man half-heartedly. Polly watched the whole scene, unsure how to feel. Since arriving here, she'd been cross-dressing, hair cut short, chest tightly bound, and no one had looked at her like that. But at the party, the way the men looked at women, it wasn't admiration, it was appraisal, like objects. Her current body was still young and malnourished, which helped her blend in for now. But what about later? Girls' bodies change every day. Maybe tomorrow she'd look different. Then what? Polly shivered and quickly cut off that train of thought. Even in the modern world, not all men respected women deep down, let alone men from over 100 years ago. She had thought she had time to plan her escape, but now she realized she didn't. A cold wind blew past. Polly suddenly stiffened, hair standing on end as an urgent thought struck her, her period. She didn't know how the original owner had dealt with menstruation. Maybe it had stopped from malnutrition. But the human endocrine system is unpredictable. What if her arrival had caused a hormonal shift? And it started now. The more Polly thought about it, the more anxious she became. Her heart thumped so loudly it echoed in her ears. She had to get out of here. Immediately. That night, Polly drifted in and out of sleep, woken by her pounding heart or the howls of coyotes from the woods. She woke so many times she began to hallucinate, thinking she was back in her bed at home, reaching out to grab her charging phone. But all she touched was damp, fishy dirt. No point in despair. She closed her eyes and repeated to herself again and again, "You are strong. You can get out of here. Right now, all you need to do is sleep." Sleep deprivation ruins thought, ruins escape. With that in mind, she finally forced herself to rest. Maybe the party had lasted too late, because the next morning, everyone slept in. When Polly got up, a dull ache bloomed in her abdomen. She froze, praying, "Please not my period. Please not my period." It was. Polly's face remained expressionless. She didn't feel embarrassed, just incredibly frustrated. But it had come, and there was no turning it back. She used some gauze from the first aid kit, then got dressed and stepped outside. And during the cramps, she had planned to talk to Erik about escaping, but he didn't show up all morning. He was always like that, appearing and vanishing without warning. She could only shelve her plan and wait for him to come around on his own. That evening, the circus had 2 performances. Neither involved her. She, the boy John, and a group of other children were not allowed on stage. Their job was to steal things from the audience: wallets, binoculars, watches, rings, thimbles, necklaces, coats, hats, anything they could snatch. Even food. The only rule, don't get caught. Before every show, Momo gathered them to warm up their hands by practicing on each other. During warm-ups, Erik still didn't appear. Polly couldn't help asking John, "Where's Erik?" "He's hurt," John replied absently. The manager gave him a month off. He scowled. Even if he wasn't hurt, he wouldn't be stuck with us. We take a month to learn something. He learns it just by watching. Momo lets him skip training altogether. The other kids, hearing Erik's name, groaned in disgust. No wonder the circus's most talented performer was isolated and resented. Giving special treatment to gifted students doesn't inspire others. It just makes them targets. Polly wanted to ask more, but John yanked on her sleeve. Momo had arrived. She was a stern middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, graying hair coiled into a tight bun. Her gray dress was stiff with a bustle that arched exaggeratedly at the waist. She carried a long cane. Her presence silenced everything: whispers, whistles, even breathing. "Take out your tools," she said calmly, scanning the group. "Time for a skill check." Then she went one by one, inspecting their pickpocketing. Polly felt her stomach drop. Even without stealing experience, she knew this took practice, like magic. No one masters it overnight. Sure enough, when it was her turn, her technique was a mess. She swallowed hard, about to explain. But Momo raised her cane and barked, "Hands out." "I'm sorry, Momo," she began, but her hands were already yanked forward. Crack. The cane lashed her palm. Instantly, a swollen red welt appeared. She was supposed to get 5 lashes, but for talking back, it became 10. The whole time, Polly repeated one word in her mind: calm. Stay calm. Don't scream. Don't fight back. Don't grab the cane. Calm. By the time the 10 lashes ended, she couldn't speak even if she wanted to curse. Her back was soaked with sweat, her palms red and blistered, bleeding slightly. Momo put the cane away and tossed her a tiny jar of ointment. "Stay in your tent. No dinner. Don't wander around. Don't embarrass yourself tonight." Polly forced a thank you through clenched teeth and turned back to her tent. There, she dug out her first aid kit, took some ibuprofen, and disinfected her hand with iodine. She had no cream for swelling and didn't trust Momo's ointment, so she just lay on her bed, dazed, counting minutes until the painkillers kicked in. She didn't know how long had passed when a rustling woke her. Someone was dragging something heavy into her tent. The person had a limp, footsteps uneven, and the dragged object writhed, making muffled, whimpering sounds. "Erik?" Polly snapped, fully awake. Afraid she might be wrong, she didn't move, just cracked her eyes open slightly. It was Erik, and the thing he dragged was Momo. Her mouth was stuffed with a rag, her arms bound behind her back. She wasn't a small woman, strong, built like a matron who could handle dozens of unruly kids. Yet Erik held her by the collar with one hand, lifting and dragging her like it was nothing. His strength was monstrous, his healing too. It looked straight out of a horror film. Erik was the monster in it. The tent filled with the stench of sweat and urine. Momo, terrified, had lost control of her bladder. Erik seemed deaf and blind to it. Ignoring the smell, her muffled pleas, he tied her to a chair with thick rope. From Polly's angle, she couldn't see details, just his rough movements and the creaking chair. Then he turned and walked toward her. Polly's mind spun. Was this revenge? Or was he just unleashing some deep bloodlust? He stopped, stood over her, staring at her bruised, swollen hands. He was young, thin to the point of frailty, but tall and broad-shouldered. His body blocked all the light from the tent flap. Above her, his breathing echoed, heavy, dull, and eerie behind the white mask. That kind of breathing was a horror trope, slow, deliberate, signifying the beast's final approach. But he wasn't trying to kill her. He was trying to protect her. Why? Polly lay still, frozen stiff. His gaze felt even heavier than his breath, tracing her wounds like a ruler, assessing length and depth. Seconds ticked by. Her heart pounded. She could hardly bear his stare. Finally, he turned, grabbed Momo, chair and all, and dragged her in front of Polly's bed. She couldn't see clearly. Just heard the sounds, breathing, footsteps, clothes shifting, muffled pleading, the stench of sweat and fear. Then, thud. The sharp, metallic scent of blood filled the tent. Polly flinched and sat up, unable to keep pretending. The scene was worse than she'd imagined. Erik stood with his back to her, holding Momo down like an animal in a slaughterhouse. In his other hand, a knife, plunging into her palm. When Polly sat up, he turned, eyes behind the mask still filled with icy, violent malice. Momo, eyes wide with desperation, shook her chair wildly, pleading for help. For a moment, the only sound was the chair creaking. Then Erik pulled out the blade, flicked the blood off with indifference, and turned to leave. Somehow, he was certain Polly would save Momo, not thank him for his eye for an eye justice. And truthfully, Polly didn't want to thank him. This wasn't justice. It felt good today. But what about tomorrow? Who would clean up the mess? Momo now had a gaping wound in her hand. Polly would need 100 lies to cover for that. Yet deep down, Erik's action gave her something strange and burning: safety. A feeling she hadn't known since transmigrating. From the start, she'd been on edge, constantly forcing herself to stay calm, suppressing fear, tension, anger. Even after being whipped, her first instinct had been, don't react. No one will help you. She was utterly alone in this world, and had to keep her head clear. But that didn't mean she hadn't been angry, that she hadn't wanted revenge. Yes, Erik's behavior was reckless and dangerous, but tonight, she'd had enough of bottling up emotions. Tomorrow's problems could wait. Looking past Momo's desperate eyes, Polly lifted her blanket, looked up at Erik, and said sincerely, "I'm tired. Will you sleep with me a while?" Polly looked completely serious. This was no joke. She really was tired and simply wanted to sleep next to Erik. She'd deal with the Momo problem after getting some rest. Of course, by sleep, she meant it literally, just rest. Nothing more. She had no romantic feelings toward Erik. Even knowing that in the 19th century, boys his age could marry and have children, to her, he was still just a high schooler. If he lived in modern times, he'd probably be in 10th or 11th grade, maybe even already in college, given how smart he was. The more she thought about it, the less afraid she felt. But Erik misunderstood her. Before she could even finish speaking, he drew his knife and drove it into the pillow beside her head, glaring down coldly. He had clearly been mocked this way many times before, and he despised it. Behind the white mask, his breathing grew louder. Polly could almost picture his furious, heated breath fogging up the inside of the mask, condensing into droplets that slowly trickled down. She swallowed, throat tightening slightly. She looked calm on the outside, but she was nearly as close to losing control of her bladder as Momo had been. If they grew more familiar later and could actually talk normally, she swore she'd get him to break this habit of waving his knife around. "You misunderstood me," she said with difficulty. "I honestly just want you to stay and sleep with me. That's it." The air seemed to freeze. Erik continued to stare at her, cold and unrelenting. Under his gaze, Polly's scalp tingled, the hair on her arms standing straight up. She suddenly realized maybe Erik never trusted her in the first place. Maybe he never intended to work with her at all. He had been startled by the kiss, maybe even shaken. But he quickly recognized that it came with strings attached. He might submit to a kiss, but not one with a price tag. Not one given without sincerity. A cold sweat broke out across Polly's back. She had almost forgotten, despite his hollow, statue-like demeanor, Erik had a brilliant mind. He could learn in one glance what others took a month to master. Of course, he could see through her manipulation. The only good news was, he had punished Momo for hurting her, for reasons unknown. Maybe it was gratitude for her sympathy, even if it was calculated. Or maybe he just needed someone to take out his murderous urges on. Whether Polly would be dragged into more trouble because of his actions clearly wasn't his concern. 1,000 thoughts flashed through her mind, but none could get her out of this situation. Finally, she clenched her teeth and made up her mind. Forget it. Just keep him here. A kiss didn't work. What about a hug? Every time she had shaken Erik's composure, it had involved physical contact. He was reclusive, withdrawn, and hypersensitive. People hated even mentioning his name. How could anyone have touched him before? Maybe a hug could bridge that gap. Polly knew she was playing a dangerous game. He had a knife, and his every move was unpredictable. Hugging someone like that was basically suicide. But letting him walk out now, leaving her alone in a tent with an injured Momo, wouldn't be much safer. Without further hesitation, she leaned forward and hugged him tightly. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Erik froze. Even his harsh breathing halted. Polly was so tense her chest cramped. She wasn't calm at all. No one could predict Erik's thoughts. He could stab her in the back at any moment. Just imagining it made her knees go weak. But thankfully she had gambled right. He couldn't resist physical contact. She felt the muscles in his arm tighten, then loosen. He hesitated. Should he push her away, kill her, or just stay still? He was so thin, thinner than she had imagined. Just bones and sinew, like a starving predator, powerful yet fragile. A person like him could pin down a strong adult woman with one hand, yet be disarmed by a hug given with hidden intentions. Polly felt something strange stirring in her chest. Was it pity? She couldn't tell. After what felt like forever, Erik finally moved. He let her hold him, bent forward, and pulled the knife from the pillow. The blade tilted, grazing her back. Polly nearly went into cardiac arrest. For a moment, she was sure this was it. She wouldn't live to see another sunrise. But he only wiped the blade against her back before sliding it back into his boot. Polly let out a huge breath, like her throat had been released from a chokehold. She nearly blacked out from relief. Whatever the case, she had won the bet. He stayed. She was alive. Thank you. Polly didn't even know what she was thanking him for. Maybe just for letting her live. If she had known her life would become like this, she would have skipped drama school and taken a course in lion taming, or volunteered at a wildlife reserve. You lie down first, she said, wiping away the tears that had gathered from sheer stress. I'm going to stop her bleeding. She can't die, not yet. I still need to ask her something. Erik didn't respond. Momo had already passed out from blood loss. Polly sprinkled clotting powder on her palm wound and gave her an ibuprofen to prevent fever and dehydration, then lay down on the bed. Worried that Erik might change his mind during the night and stab her, she buried her face in his chest, wrapped both arms tightly around his, and refused to let go. Maybe because he did crave physical closeness, the night passed without incident. She woke with all her limbs intact. Momo had woken too, and was now staring at them with a very strange expression. Polly pulled out the gold pocket watch. It was 5 in the morning, still a while before the others woke up. Momo's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw the watch in Polly's possession. Polly ignored her. She slipped out of the sleeping bag quietly, but no matter how soft her movements were, Erik still woke up. Or maybe he had never fallen asleep. The night had been long enough for her to recover from the fear of nearly dying, though her knees still wobbled a little when she looked into his eyes. Are you hungry? No reply. Polly was used to his silence by now. I want to ask Momo some questions. About you. Do you mind? If you do, I won't ask. Still no reply, no movement. That meant it was okay. Polly let out a sigh of relief. Great. She couldn't keep guessing his thoughts forever. Controlling him wasn't easy. She needed to learn more about his background. She thought for a moment, walked to the pile of dirty clothes, and carefully avoided Momo's gaze as she retrieved the first aid kit. She pulled out an energy bar, chocolate flavor. Hopefully, he'd like it. She unwrapped it, broke it in half, and held out a piece. It's sweet, good for energy. Half for each of us, okay? She took a bite first. Erik stared at the chocolate for a long time, before slowly taking it from her hand. Chocolate already existed in this time period, so he wasn't suspicious, just bent down and sniffed it carefully. After several seconds, he tilted his head slightly and pushed up the corner of his mask, revealing a sliver of his jaw before taking a bite. It was the first time Polly had seen any part of his face beneath the mask, even just the jaw and lips. He didn't seem disfigured. His jaw was slender, angular, his lips pale, nearly the same color as his skin. Just from the shape of his chin, he could be considered handsome. Polly didn't comment on his looks, wisely. It was still early. She decided to build rapport with Erik before turning to interrogate Momo. She sat down, then gently reached out and took his wrist. Erik looked down at her hand but didn't pull away. Polly exhaled silently and said softly, "I want to tell you a secret." No response. "I woke up one day and realized I'd forgotten a lot. I don't even remember who I am. I don't know why I stole Mike's watch and framed you. All I had was a diary and a strange-looking bag. The diary warned me to stay away from you, said you were dangerous, but I don't know why. I feel like I can trust you. Maybe you'll kill me someday," she added. "But I won't blame you. I chose this path. I chose to approach you, to be your friend. I can feel that you're not a bad person." She raised her injured hand. The bruise had turned a horrible shade of purple red. "When you saw I was hurt, your first instinct was revenge. You didn't even know if I had ulterior motives for befriending you, and yet you did it anyway. If that makes you a bad person, then I don't know what a good person is." Polly looked at him firmly. "I don't know what you've been through, and I'm not going to judge your past. But I'd like to know more about you. Can we be friends?" Long silence. Erik stared at her hand, seemingly deep in thought. Then finally, a voice whispered by her ear, "Why?" Polly jerked her head up. He spoke. She was so stunned, she didn't even know how to describe his voice. She only remembered that it was clear and beautiful, the most beautiful teenage voice she had ever heard. It took her a moment to find her own voice again. "Because you make me feel safe." It was the truth. Even though he might kill her at any moment, his presence gave her a twisted sort of security. Maybe because he was the only person in this world she truly understood. She even knew the path of his destiny, that he would one day live beneath the Paris Opera House, fall in love with a ballerina named Christine. Just then, a cold laugh rang out. Polly turned. Momo had somehow spit out the rag stuffed in her mouth and was now staring at them with mocking eyes. She didn't scream or struggle like the night before. Maybe she was afraid of Erik. Instead, she lifted her chin and looked at them with a mix of disgust and fear. Polly didn't hesitate. She picked up a fire poker from the corner and aimed it at Momo's head. "Unless we give you permission, don't make a sound. I won't hesitate to make you suffer." Momo glared at her, eyes filled with rage and humiliation. But after a long moment, she swallowed her pride and nodded. Polly set the poker down. "Looks like you've got something to say. Go ahead." Given permission, Momo gave a weak chuckle. "You think you've made a new friend, someone to fight your battles, but have you ever wondered why he didn't speak before? Why he had no friends?" Polly didn't respond. That was clearly bait. Instead, she joked, "He's shy?" Momo looked at her like she was an idiot. "He speaks more than 10 languages. We found him in Persia. Locals said he became a master of trapdoors before he was 14, but no one dared speak to him. No one even whispered about him. You know why?" Polly vaguely remembered this part from the original novel, but she hadn't read it thoroughly. The details escaped her. Her hesitation emboldened Momo, who sneered and went on. "Because he's a freak, a demon. They called him the living dead. He could use trapdoors to appear behind anyone, anytime. No one wanted to be around someone like that, even if he was a genius. But our manager doesn't believe in curses. Thought he could turn him into a cash cow," Momo wheezed. 3 months since he joined the circus. We made money, sure. But strange things started happening too. First, Mike's watch disappeared. Then a strange bag fell from the sky. Couldn't even cut it open. And now my hand. Look at it." Momo hissed through her teeth, her voice like a viper's hiss. "If all this doesn't prove he's a demon, a monster who brings disaster, then what will? He stabbed my hand today, he could stab yours tomorrow. All 3 incidents had involved Polly. Superstition ruins lives, she thought, and promptly stuffed the rag back into Momo's mouth. One way or another, Polly had gotten the information she needed from Momo. Although she couldn't recall all the details from the original novel, she vaguely remembered that Erik had first joined the circus, then learned magic and singing, and eventually rose to fame, earning the title of eccentric genius and trapdoor master in Persia. Here, it was completely reversed. It seemed she had truly landed in the horror movie version. A cold sweat slid down Polly's back. She had seen plenty of horror films, and starred in quite a few herself. Due to cultural differences, Western horror films rarely featured ghosts. Most focused on serial killers and how brutally they murdered their victims. Of course, sometimes to make sequels work, these killers were granted inhuman strength and resilience. In those movies, the terrifying thing wasn't that the killer was powerful, but that they were born evil, unpredictable, uncommunicative, and utterly merciless. Some might talk to their victims, but only to break their spirit and savor the fear. Polly could only be grateful this wasn't a traditional horror flick, and that Erik wasn't a deranged slasher. Yes, he was unpredictable and hard to communicate with, but at least he craved physical closeness. He could be swayed by a hug. Polly felt her values had started to twist. She was actually thinking Erik wasn't that scary. Maybe, just maybe, he could change. Polly was fully aware Erik was dangerous. He could kill her at any moment. His blade had grazed her throat, her teeth, her back more times than she could count. He had only spoken once. She had to rely on guesswork to understand him. And yet, maybe because she'd escaped death 3 times already, seeing him now triggered an adrenaline rush and an intense will to survive. Her brain fired like lightning. After transmigrating, she had felt extremely lonely and helpless. She needed someone, or something, to pull her out of that despair. Erik was a perfect candidate. Polly thought, wasn't that a kind of healthy relationship? She and Erik could make great partners. Thinking this, she turned her head to look at Erik. Erik was looking back at her, unblinking. He seemed surprised by how she had handled Momo. His eyes showed a hint of scrutiny. Meeting his gaze, Polly cleared her throat and said calmly, "We need to clean up." Erik didn't respond, but Polly understood his expression. He didn't know what cleanup meant, nor did he understand why she said we. After all, he had done everything alone, capturing Momo, tying her to the chair, stabbing her palm. And yet, Polly said, "we." The word clearly confused him. His eyes scrutinized her more intensely, even showing a trace of suspicion. Polly had every reason to compare him to a wild animal. His wariness surpassed that of anyone she'd ever met. Even now, she sensed she hadn't truly convinced him. He hadn't been persuaded by her words, but rather had surrendered to loneliness. He craved physical contact. He longed for kindness, even if it came with strings attached. Polly said, "It's almost morning. We can't let her talk about what happened." She repeated "we" again. Erik paused, but didn't object. Convincing Momo to cooperate was surprisingly easy. Erik had the knife. Polly had the mouth. Polly showed Momo the now treated wound and said, "If you keep this quiet, I'll find a way to heal your hand. Otherwise," she leaned in, voice cold, "I don't mind making sure you lose the hand entirely. It's not like it's mine." Momo glanced at Erik, then nodded with humiliation. Polly thought for a moment and added 2 conditions. First, Momo could no longer make her steal. She had no interest in being arrested and exiled as a thief. Second, Polly pulled out the gold pocket watch and shoved it into Momo's skirt pocket. "Return this to Mike. Tell everyone Erik didn't steal it. You found it in the woods and forgot to give it back." Momo stared at the watch, stunned. "It was you who framed him, and he still stood up for you. What kind of spell did you put on him?" Polly patted her shoulder. "That's not something you need to know. Just do as I say." But Momo's eyes darted mischievously, as if sensing a chance to sow discord. Polly had worked too hard to gain Erik's trust. No way she'd let her meddle now. She took a deep breath, imagined herself as a fierce, desperate thug, and drove her elbow hard into Momo's temple. Then she bent down, stared into her eyes, and growled, "Do as I say, or you'll lose your other hand too." It was Polly's first time using acting to threaten someone. The effect wasn't perfect, but her elbow strike nearly sent Momo to the afterlife. Momo broke out in cold sweat, head spinning. Afraid she'd be hit again, she nodded vigorously to anything Polly said. Just like that, Polly got what she wanted. She sighed in relief and turned to look at Erik, only to find he had vanished. Polly shrugged. She didn't mind. For the next 2 days, she'd be focused on planning her escape. First, she needed the hiking backpack. That backpack was everything: hat, coat, underwear, snacks, canned food, sanitary pads. Her current body was malnourished, so gauze was enough for now. But what about later? She didn't want to deal with infections. She also had a backup phone and power bank. The backup phone was an old iPhone with only 85% battery health. It could shut down unexpectedly, but it ran smoothly and had lots of storage, including a ton of ebooks. Her reading taste was eclectic: novels, sociology, you name it. One of the books was called How to Skin a Lion, a compendium of tips from the Middle Ages to the Victorian era: how to train horses, make hand cream, keep your breath fresh, and yes, how to skin a lion. She had only bought it for curiosity's sake, never expected it to come in handy. Most importantly, this world already had generators. If she was lucky enough, she might be able to live a 21st century life in this era. She had to get that backpack, no matter what. But there was a problem. The manager had noticed it and moved it into the main tent, the largest one in the circus, guarded by hired gunmen day and night. There was no way she could get it alone. And she didn't want to ask Erik for help. Given their current relationship, she was already grateful that he hadn't killed her, that he no longer used his knife to communicate, and that he was willing to leave the circus with her. Asking for more might change their dynamic, and she wasn't ready for what that might mean. So Polly had to find another way, to see if anyone else in the circus could be used. For the next 3 days, she forced herself to interact with others, ignoring Erik completely. To her surprise, the circus folks weren't as scary as she'd imagined. Most were drifters with no education, couldn't even spell their own names. Besides Erik, the most educated person was the manager. After him came a magician named Richard Simon. Apparently, Richard used to be the circus's star magician. He was good-looking, charming, and performed classics: floating apples, pulling coins from ears, rabbits from hats. Many fans adored him. Some even came from New York to invite him to perform on Broadway. But once Erik showed up, Richard became second tier, only getting the spotlight when Erik took time off. Lately, Polly noticed Richard lingering outside the main tent, clearly trying to reclaim his top spot while Erik was injured. Polly figured maybe she could use this magician to retrieve her bag. At dinner, she carried her plate and sat beside him. Richard looked quite refined: deep-set eyes, sharp nose, a gentle and melancholic air. He wore a thin wool coat over a white shirt and velvet vest, with a fake gemstone ring on his thumb. "Mr. Simon," Polly greeted him with a smile. The moment she spoke, her back prickled. A chilling, needling sensation crawled up her spine. Someone was watching her. The gaze was intense, almost physical. Startled, she turned. Nothing. "A hallucination?" Richard responded. "Good evening, Polly." Polly forced herself to focus. They must have been close before. Only familiar people called each other by first names. Otherwise, it was always Mr. or Miss. She ignored the lingering unease and casually asked, "What did the manager say?" Richard paused, then gave a bitter smile. "So, even, he sighed. "The manager didn't say much, but it's obvious. He doesn't want me anymore. Can't blame him. Erik performs more tricks, asks for less pay. Of course he'd pick him. I'm thinking of trying my luck with another troupe." Polly put on a sympathetic look. "Can't you talk to him again?" "Even if I matched Erik's salary," Richard rubbed his temples with a tired smile, "it wouldn't matter. Erik is just too good. He picks up tricks after seeing them once. He's a natural. I can't compete." Polly leaned in, pretending to be indignant. "Mr. Simon, you're a good man. What they're doing to you is awful." Richard looked surprised by her passion, but still said, "Thank you, Polly. That means a lot." She placed a hand on his shoulder, lowering her voice. "I don't have much influence, but I do know something that might help you." Richard straightened. "I'm listening. You've heard about the strange bag, right? The one that fell from the sky?" "Yes," Polly said, "but it didn't fall. A leather merchant stole it from Louis Vuitton himself." "Louis Vuitton? You mean the one from Paris?" Polly breathed a quiet sigh of relief. She had guessed right. By 1888, Louis Vuitton was already famous. If Richard hadn't heard of him, she wouldn't have known who else to cite. "Yes, I heard it's incredibly intricate. Mr. Vuitton tried many times but only made one. It was meant for royalty, but someone stole it. Now the manager plans to exhibit it like some oddity. But I think if someone returns it to Mr. Vuitton, maybe they'll get a royal introduction. Richard fell into deep thought. After a while, he looked up and clasped her hands. Thank you for telling me. If I ever make it big, I won't forget your kindness. Polly smiled back, gripping his hands firmly. She didn't need his gratitude, just for him to steal the bag and leave the circus. Then she would convince Erik to reclaim the bag. Richard was mild, mannered, and average in size, far easier to rob than the manager. With that plan in place, Polly's mood soared. Even that creepy watched feeling vanished. She finished her bread and potatoes to the last bite. Richard was clearly tempted. All evening, he kept glancing at the main tent, rubbing his thumb anxiously. He stared at the tent. Polly watched him, estimating when he'd act. As a magician, he had speed and reflexes far above normal. He could definitely pull it off. He just lacked the nerve. That night, he smoked a cigar, clenched his thumb, and finally strode toward the main tent. Before going, he looked back at Polly. She nodded and mouthed, "Good luck." He visited the tent almost every night, and since it was showtime, most guards were stationed at the performance tent to deter rowdy drunks. Only 2 guards remained by the main tent, playing cards. They waved Richard in without hesitation. Half an hour later, he came out, calm and confident. Polly didn't know how he did it, but she knew he had succeeded. She let out a long, relieved breath. Now she could focus on her escape plan. She had a feeling tonight would be her best night's sleep since arriving. She was wrong. In the middle of the night, heavy footsteps approached. The tent flap lifted. Someone dragging something heavy stepped inside. Polly opened her eyes, groggy. The first thing she saw was a white, hollow mask. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over her head. She sat bolt upright, shivering. What she saw next made her blood run cold. In the dark, Erik held an unconscious Richard in one hand and her hiking backpack in the other, calmly walking toward her. His gaze was empty, emotionless. Polly's stomach clenched. Her throat went dry. What was he doing? Had everything she done meant nothing? Why? What had she done wrong? What did Richard do wrong? Erik's eyes were as hollow as the mask he wore. Without a glance at Richard, he dropped him like trash and stepped forward with the backpack. His tall figure loomed, shadows swallowing her whole. Polly panicked, wanting to retreat, but her body froze. One step away from her sleeping bag, Erik stopped. He bent down and tossed the backpack beside her. With a loud thump, it landed, like it had hit her raw nerves. Her mind went blank. What did this mean? Was he threatening her? Or gifting her a reward? Of course she had to take the bag. It contained everything, but her plan was in ruins. She'd only needed to follow Richard after he fled the circus with the bag. Now Richard lay unconscious at her feet. The bag sat beside her, and Erik stared at her with that chilling, inscrutable gaze. She would have to fix everything again. Figure out what he was thinking, why he looked at her like that. Polly looked at the peacefully unconscious Richard and wished, why couldn't it have been me who passed out instead? Seeing that she remained frozen, Erik suddenly reached out and grabbed her hair. His movement wasn't particularly rough. Compared to how he had dragged Momo and Richard, this was gentle, almost like he was toying with a doll. But that didn't mean he wouldn't suddenly snap the doll's head off like a beast. No one could ever guess what he was thinking. Polly went rigid, letting him turn her head. He wanted her to look at Richard. Why? A warning, perhaps, that if she messed up, she'd end up just like him? But she didn't even know what Richard had done wrong. Suddenly, a flash of insight pierced the fog in her mind, like lightning. She thought she understood now. In the original story, Erik did fall for the heroine, but he never planned to reveal himself to her. The only reason he eventually appeared was because, after the heroine's stunning performance, she got engaged to a young, handsome Viscount. Erik was deeply ashamed of his appearance. He never kept mirrors near him, never allowed anything reflective around. Even his dagger was specially treated to be dull, like frosted glass. Yet here Polly was, flirting with him one moment, then cozying up to another young, attractive magician the next. Even if nothing romantic had occurred to Erik, this was betrayal, a serious insult. After realizing this, Polly didn't feel relief. Instead, her back was soaked in cold sweat, her heart pounding violently in her temples. If her guess was right, how could she possibly make things right? Would he still be willing to work with her and help her escape? Her anxiety reached the brink of collapse. Her heart beat so hard it felt like it would split open, and she didn't even have the strength to swallow. In the end, Polly decided to trust her instincts. She slowly stood up. She didn't dare move too quickly, afraid that if he really was like a wild beast, she'd trigger a primal hunting instinct and get pounced or have her neck snapped. Erik stared at her. His gaze behind the mask didn't change, nor did he stop her. Now, Polly took a deep breath and turned around to hug him tightly. He smelled unpleasant, like a restless animal in a cage, with the scent of hay and an overwhelming stench of blood. When she hugged him last time, he hadn't reeked of blood this strongly. She didn't want to think about whose blood it was. Closing her eyes, she tried to suppress her fear and whispered, "My original plan was for Richard Simon to steal the backpack, and then we'd follow him and take it back. But you got it for me first. It doesn't really change things. It just means we have to leave tonight." No response. "Soon, the manager will realize the backpack is missing," she continued, her voice growing calmer. "The first suspects will be the guards, but the guards saw Richard Simon go into the tent. After questioning them, the manager will definitely send people to search Richard's tent." Polly looked down at the unconscious Richard. "But now, he's in my tent. The manager will either think he ran away with the bag or believe he's still hiding in the circus. The backpack's heavy. If Richard tried to escape with it, he'd need a horse," Polly explained. "So the manager will first check the stables. If all horses are accounted for, they'll start a full search." At this point, Polly had completely regained her composure. The situation was already in motion. Only calm thinking could solve it. "Before the full search begins, we need to take the backpack and get out. Now." She didn't dare ask Erik to carry the bag. Gritting her teeth, she tried to lift it herself. But her body was weak. The backpack, over 60 pounds, nearly knocked her over as soon as she picked it up. Erik steadied her and took the pack from her shoulder. Polly let out a huge sigh of relief. Sure, he was the reason for this mess, but he was helping carry the bag and willing to leave with her. What more could she ask for? She showed him how to wear the backpack, then rummaged through the dirty clothes to grab the first aid kit. Lifting the tent flap, she hunched low and carefully slipped out. Erik followed close behind. Polly felt more pressure than ever. She didn't know when the manager would initiate the search. She had no time or energy to move Richard. If the search started now, the manager would know they took the bag. And Erik, he was unpredictable. Even if he believed her now and agreed to leave together, he could still abandon her or kill her at any moment. It felt like walking through a pitch-black swamp. Every step difficult, no one to turn to. She forced herself to stay positive. There were 2 3-pound butter hot pot cans in the bag. 3-year shelf life. Just heat and eat. Lately, she'd been living on bread and potatoes. Meat only showed up during parties. And even then, it was unseasoned animal liver. Once they got somewhere safe, she'd reward herself with a proper hot pot. The thought of salty, spicy stew reignited her strength. She nearly drooled. October nights were freezing, and worse, tonight brought heavy fog. That was good news. Flames couldn't pierce the mist, so the circus would struggle to track them. But if she got separated from Erik, she'd be totally lost. And the fog soaked her quickly. Her clothes felt heavy and clung to her skin like wet rags. She hadn't forgotten. They were near a swamp. There were crocodiles, and the guards had guns. If not for her stable mental state, she might have already flung herself into a tree out of despair. At this point, Polly no longer worried whether Erik would strangle her. She clung tightly to his arm, pressing against him as they walked. Erik glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. Before they knew it, they'd reached a fork in the path. One side led to the stables, the other didn't. Polly tiptoed and whispered in his ear, "Are we riding a horse? I don't know how. Will that be a problem?" This escape had been too rushed. Originally, she'd planned to steal some sugar cubes or carrots from the kitchen to calm the horse. She'd never ridden a real one, but she'd played games, and that's what worked in games. Suddenly, Erik grabbed her hair and yanked her head back, roughly. Polly gasped, ignoring the sting in her scalp, thinking they'd been caught. But everything was still and silent. The night was empty. Then she realized he yanked her hair because she'd gotten too close. Her warm breath had hit his ear. Polly felt he was like a guard dog, one that bit, barked, and had the nerves of a jumpy cat. Suppressing her irritation, she covered her mouth and muttered, "So, are we riding or not?" Erik didn't answer, but he walked toward the stables. Polly followed immediately. Her luck sucked. They'd barely taken 2 steps when a piercing whistle cut through the fog, followed by rapid footsteps. Someone was waking each tent. "Wake up, everyone up." Richard ran off. "The manager's got something to say." Polly flinched, as if slapped by the whistle's shriek. Soon, the whole circus stirred. But no one shouted. It was as if they all sensed the gravity of the situation. Polly didn't dare turn back. She silently quickened her pace. Suddenly, a hand reached out and slammed her head down. Her heart nearly stopped. A moment later, she realized it was Erik. Someone nearby was patrolling the stable entrance with a lantern. "Cold night, huh?" One of them grumbled. "Why'd Richard Simon run? Didn't he already agree with the manager to take the bag to Paris?" His words were, "He didn't want Vuitton's reward, just what's inside the bag," the other replied. "Maybe he opened it and found it worthless, got mad. Who told him it was from Louis Vuitton? Who knows? But the only person he spoke to tonight was that kid Polly. Let's grab him for questioning later." Polly's blood went cold. She had been completely wrong. Erik hadn't knocked Richard out because of his good looks. He had done it because Richard never followed the plan. She had underestimated these people, thought the promise of a Louis Vuitton reward would be enough to make Richard risk everything. But Richard had been far more cautious. His first instinct had been to use her information to negotiate with the manager and trade for whatever was inside the bag. Before, the manager never let Richard near it, probably to avoid conflict in case it contained valuables. After some backroom deal, the manager agreed to let Richard take the bag and try to open it. As a magician, it was only a matter of time before he found the hidden clasp. If Erik hadn't stepped in, Polly would have lost the backpack, and maybe even been exposed. Her driver's license was in there. She didn't know exactly what this body looked like, but going by transmigration logic, it probably wasn't far from her original appearance. Then what? Would the manager interrogate her about the items, or treat her like four-legged girl Emily, and turn her into a specimen? Erik had saved her life, and she'd thought he acted out of jealousy. Polly looked up at him, wanting to apologize, but couldn't find the words. Erik noticed her gaze of guilt, but he showed no emotion, didn't react at all. He was used to being misunderstood. Compared to what he'd endured before, her fear and doubt meant nothing. Still, Polly didn't look away. Her eyes lingered on his mask, strange and warm. How could someone's gaze feel like invisible fingers, brushing across the mask? It made Erik deeply uncomfortable, as if her eyes might peel away the mask and touch the real skin underneath. The sensation filled him with unease and shame. A sudden urge surged within him. He wanted to choke her, crush her windpipe, make her eyes lose focus, her heartbeat stop, so she could never look at his face again. Just then, Polly figured out how to apologize. He liked physical contact, so she gave him another hug. She wrapped her arms around him, leaned up, kissed his mask, and softly said, "Sorry. I misunderstood you." The patrol had already passed, so she wasn't worried about being heard. Erik shoved her away forcefully, but he didn't abandon her. He still let her stay close, pressed against him as they moved forward. Polly didn't overthink it. She figured he was just shy. At that moment, a sharp whistle pierced the air from the direction of the camp, followed by a swarm of torches lighting up the area, as if a fire had broken out. The circus had discovered their escape and began searching for them with blazing torches. The fog thickened rapidly. Dense, gray-white mist moved like a living creature between the towering cypress trees. In moments, the firelight from the camp was swallowed by the fog, leaving only a faint glow behind. Still, this wasn't a good sign. The thicker the fog, the closer it was to dawn. Polly regretted letting Momo return the gold pocket watch to Mike. If she still had the watch, at least she'd know what time it was. Worse, returning the watch hadn't earned Erik any apology or compensation. People still saw him as a freak. Not far away was the stable, home to more than 10 horses, most of them draft or pack animals, large, slow, and used mainly for hauling wagons. Only one good horse remained in the circus. The manager called it Caesar. It was a lean, powerful Arabian white stallion, graceful and refined, with a coat as smooth as silk. Under certain light, its skin shimmered with an iridescent seashell-like glow. Polly had tried to bond with Caesar by feeding him a few times. He was spoiled like a pampered dog, picking at carrots and demanding fruit after every meal. She'd never even had fruit in the circus. After a few tries, Polly gave up the idea of escaping on Caesar. He was too spoiled. If he got grumpy during an escape, he might just throw her off. But Erik effortlessly led Caesar out. Polly couldn't believe her eyes. She'd always thought Caesar was like a dog. He'd bare his teeth if he disliked his food. The horse trainer once said that when Caesar went berserk, he bit off a caretaker's ear. Ever since, Polly was terrified of those big, even teeth and avoided going near him. Now the stallion barely snorted, as if sensing the danger in Erik's scent. He let Erik strap the backpack to the back of the saddle without protest. Polly saw herself in Caesar. They both feared being stabbed by Erik without warning. Out of sympathy, she gently patted Caesar's head. Surprisingly, Caesar didn't resist. He even nudged her palm with his nose. Erik didn't glance at them. He mounted the horse in one swift motion. Polly hesitated. She had no idea how to tell him she'd never ridden a horse in her life. Before she could figure out a graceful way to say it, Erik leaned down, grabbed her by the ribs, and hoisted her onto the saddle in front of him. He didn't know how to handle people gently. His grip under her arms burned with pain. Polly didn't dare complain, fearing he might hurt her worse. This couldn't go on. If they were going to travel together, Erik needed some social training. She didn't expect him to hold normal conversations, but he had to learn how to touch people properly. If their relationship improved, maybe she'd even convince him to take a bath someday. Erik lightly flicked the reins, and Caesar began to gallop. Polly clutched the saddle horn tightly, terrified she'd fall off. If she did, Erik definitely wouldn't stop to pick her up. Just then, gunshots rang out behind them. The circus had discovered Caesar was missing and fired warning shots into the air. Now Polly understood why people in Los Angeles flinched at loud noises. If you'd never had a bullet whiz past your back, you'd never understand how it felt, like a whip striking your heart. Polly tried to reassure herself. Guns weren't that accurate back then. Even in daylight, a shot could miss. And now the fog was thick. That comforting thought had barely formed when several bangs rang out. A bullet struck the ground right by Caesar's hooves. Under Erik's control, Caesar reared back in panic but didn't throw them off. Polly's back was instantly soaked in sweat. Her heart pounded in her throat. Blood surged to her temples. Her body nearly collapsed into Erik's arms. At that point, she didn't care what Erik was thinking. She twisted around and pressed herself into his chest, hoping to use him as a human shield. To her surprise, Erik didn't push her away. She could hear his heartbeat. His gaze was cold and empty, but his heart was strong and fast, like a high-powered hydraulic pump, relentlessly sending hot blood through his limbs. In his arms, Polly felt something she hadn't in a long time. Warmth. Safety. But the moment was shattered. A wagon appeared in the road ahead, not a carriage, but a flatbed freight cart, completely blocking their path. On the wagon, a guard pointed a rifle at them and shouted, "Stop, stop, or I'll shoot." For several seconds, Polly's mind went blank. Her whole body felt submerged in ice water, paralyzed. This was beyond anything she could handle. She was smart, fast-thinking, but still just a regular person. She had no clue how to deal with this. Just as they were about to crash into the wagon, Erik suddenly yanked back on the reins. Caesar reared up with a shrill neigh. The world spun. Terrified, Polly clung to Caesar's neck. The stallion was panting hard, sweating, clearly just as panicked. But Erik leaned forward, squeezed with his knees, and forced Caesar to settle down. Polly had just started to breathe again when the next moment became burned into her memory. Erik threw a rope. It looped cleanly around the guard's neck. He yanked it back hard. No one knew how he did it or how strong he really was, but the force ripped the guard's head clean off. Polly cursed her sharp vision. She saw the neatly severed neck, red muscle and white spine exposed. Erik calmly reeled the rope back in, bit by bit. Polly saw a shred of flesh clinging to the rope and almost threw up. She turned her head and squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the gore. Yes, she'd watched plenty of horror movies, but nothing prepared her for this. Especially the blood. It was real. Black, warm, oozing. It congealed in the wind like a jelly of death. Erik only looked calm. His heart raced. The scene seemed to excite him. Strangely, Polly shrank into herself, trying to make her presence as small as possible, afraid he'd remember she was still alive and snap her neck too. But Erik didn't look at her. His gaze fell on the guard's rifle. Seconds passed. Polly had just calmed down enough to think when she said, voice shaky, "Should we take it?" Erik said nothing, but dismounted and picked it up. He handled the gun with practiced ease, ejecting and reloading with fluid precision. No matter how many times Polly witnessed it, she remained stunned. He was a genius. If not for his appearance, he could have been a world-famous inventor or magician. She hated to admit it, but she was deeply relieved he hadn't torn off her head the first time they met. Erik finished inspecting the rifle, then started going through the guard's pockets. Polly had no idea how long this would take. She was nervous, alone on the horse, wanting to climb down, but she didn't know how to dismount. She had never learned. If she made a wrong move, she might spook Caesar, and that would be the least of her problems. She could easily break her neck. She didn't know why Erik had left her on the horse. Was it a trust test? To see if she'd turn around and leave him? But she couldn't ride. Minutes crawled by. The circus could arrive at any moment. Tension prickled her spine. She clutched the saddle horn, frozen. Thankfully, Erik finished looting the body and turned back toward her, but it was already too late. The fog lit up with torchlight, approaching fast, like wildfire spreading. The circus had caught up. Faces emerged from the darkness. Over a dozen unfamiliar men stared at them blankly, like eerie black and white photos in a haunted museum. The tension was unbearable. Leading them was a man on a black horse. While Polly sat trembling, he looked calm, effortlessly in control. The manager. This was Polly's first face-to-face encounter with the circus manager since her transmigration. He was about 40, average-looking, with a neat mustache and a dark suit. A gold pocket watch chain dangled from his vest, giving him a refined, gentlemanly air, but a cigarette was tucked behind his ear. The holster on his saddle was open, revealing the ivory grip of a revolver. In the heavy silence, the manager finally spoke, his tone unhurried. "Honestly, I'm curious. How did you convince Erik to run away with you?" Polly met his eyes, palms slick with cold sweat. "I spent 3 months with him," the manager continued, "and only ever heard him say 3 sentences, not mute, okay, and got it. He can sing, but never on stage. No one knows where the voice comes from. Is it his throat? His chest? Or maybe he hides a phonograph under the stage?" It was a joke. Polly didn't laugh. The atmosphere was as still as death. She instinctively looked at Erik. He stood between her and the manager, expression unreadable, mood unknowable. "To learn about his past, I visited locals," the manager said. "A Persian man named Daroga told me Erik's a demon, brings misfortune to those around him. He also said Erik is cold, ruthless, a killer with a talent for terrifying inventions. The most shocking part? He can strangle men with a rope, even if they're armed." The manager shook his head. "I thought the Persian was lying. Who'd believe something so absurd? But then I saw it myself. All of this came from the original novel." Polly's voice was tight. "What's your point?" The manager smiled. "My point is, he's powerful, almost invincible, but he's also dangerous. Are you sure you want to travel with someone like that? You don't get to ask." "Oh, you poor fool." The manager shook his head. "He was a convicted criminal in Persia. I pulled strings to buy him from the nobles. I gave him freedom, a fresh start, and a chance to become a star. And this is how he repays me? No wonder Erik never killed Mike." Mike was the manager's nephew, and the manager saved his life. Polly said, "If that's true, why did you turn a blind eye when he was humiliated?" The manager shrugged. "God knows why Mike dragged him behind a horse. You saw what he did to the guard. If he wanted, he could have snapped Mike's neck in an instant. Why didn't he? Who knows what he's thinking?" "Do you?" "Maybe," Polly said calmly. "That was his way of repaying you. Mike is your nephew." He held back. The manager blinked, then laughed. "Good. Very good. That's a clever explanation. No wonder he listens to you." His lips curled with amusement. "But, are you really choosing to travel with him?" "These past few days, I've been watching you both. I know you've realized how dangerous he is. Maybe you didn't notice, but others did. There's a bruise on your neck, 5 finger marks. He choked you, didn't he?" So the one watching in the shadows had been the manager. That explained why Erik stabbing Momo hadn't caused any fallout. Someone had been observing her, seeing how close she could get to Erik. Polly looked at Erik. He didn't look back. His eyes were unreadable. He'd clearly expected this confrontation. She turned back to the manager. "What do you want?" His tone was casual. "It's simple. Erik can't work for me anymore. He's no use to me now, but you're far more valuable." He took the cigarette from behind his ear, lit it with a match, and took a drag. "You know where the bag came from. You know what it's for. That matters to me. If you stay and help me unlock its secrets, I'll give you everything. Fame, money, whatever you want. Polly thought, as if she weren't a modern woman, if she were truly Polly Clement, she might have fallen for that speech. After all, the manager did seem like the better bet. He had more people, more guns, more influence. All Erik had was a rope and a rifle. Who in their right mind would choose Erik? But she couldn't forget what she'd seen. How Erik decapitated a man with a rope. That wasn't natural. It defied physics. This was a horror world. He might have inhuman strength. Since transmigrating, she had played every angle, endured humiliation, taken careful steps, just to earn Erik's trust and survive. How could she throw all that away for one man's empty promise? Erik, she whispered, voice trembling. The manager didn't stop her. He looked confident, certain she'd choose him over a dangerous freak. Erik finally looked at her. His gaze was eerily calm, like nothing she said could surprise him. I choose you, she said, and watched with her own eyes as Erik froze in shock. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nuevi Story. Thanks for listening.